She wrote, from the start, America was torn by the clash of her political system with the altruist morality. She called us an altruist morality because there were places where Jesus told the Mother Teresas of the world to sell what you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. If you read those passages carefully, it says, little flock, do this. There were other passages such as the seller of purple and the guy who donated the tomb to Jesus, who are described as rich as Abraham was, where basically God's not interested in how much money you have and you make. God's interested in the condition of your heart. She didn't understand that, so she said, capitalism and altruism are incompatible. They cannot exist in the same man or in the same society. Today, the conflict has reached its ultimate climax. I don't think she was right about that. I think it reached its ultimate climax last year with that plane crash hitting a tree. You should know you have a copy of an article my local paper did on the financial seminary. Read it because they interviewed, I said the problems of today, this was several years ago, are Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman's individualistic morality. And they went and talked to the, get this, ethics professor at Duke Business School about the idea, who is a Rand disciple. And in it, he says religion is incompatible with business. They cannot coexist. That is being taught at the Duke School of Business. Okay? Here's the irony. I served on Schuler's board with a guy named J.B. Fuqua. Anybody hear of him? Fuqua Industries and so on. J.B. has chaired more New York Stock Exchange companies than any man in history. Okay? Done pretty well in business. J.B. gave $30 million to Duke to establish the Fuqua School of Business, graduate school, that's J.B. And so they hired a young man who is teaching that J.B. couldn't do what J.B. did. The irony is, I'd almost bet you the professor of ethics at Duke has never been in business. And yet he's teaching our young people coming up that they can't be Christians and be in business. That's some of what is going on today. Here's what The Economist magazine said in 1994. They did a special on all the most influential thinkers in the world. We were focused on Hillary Clinton, a Methodist. The Economist was focused on an atheist called Ayn Rand. They said, Ayn Rand, the heroine of America's libertarian right, described her philosophy as the concept of man as a noble being. It's humanism, guys. Okay? Greenspan not long ago testified before Congress. He said, my major mistake was I had too much confidence in human nature. Okay? It's all because of Ayn Rand. With his own happiness as moral purpose of his life, atomistic individualism with productive achievement or making money as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. Reason as his only absolute. No revelation of any nature. The Reagan presidency provided opportunities for a few objectivists to try their hand at their most hated institution, government. In reality, Christianity was our most hated institution because we affirmed the need for government in Romans 13 and so on. The most celebrated Randist even survived the passing of the Reagan years. Alan Greenspan was an acolyte of Rand's in the 60s. Chris Cox, head of the SEC, was also a disciple. Michael Milken, the junk bond king, spent his time in prison rereading Ayn Rand. By the way, Dick, when I used to come here in the early 90s, Mike was in jail, and there was some guy in financial services here who used to buy the tapes and ship them to Mike in prison. I've always hoped that I had something to do with that change in heart, and he actually read them. I don't know. The funny thing about this is that when you read the article, you will notice that in one of my first books, I spent a chapter contrasting Sir John Templeton with that of Ayn Rand. And Sir John was certainly a guy who was favorable to business. But they believed the opposite things, basically, in life. And my editor said, no one's ever heard of Ayn Rand, get rid of her. Okay? And my senior editor, I said, okay, I'll just leave a sentence in. Referenced her. And my senior editor, who writes for Christianity Today and so on, said, you've got to say more than this. And so I just faxed him what she had told me to take out. And he said he had never understood his family until he read that, because they were a perfect blend of Jesus and Ayn Rand. And he said, I've been confused about my family my whole life. I want you to imagine for a second, imagine the uproar if Obama nominates a Surgeon General who has been a disciple of a woman who proudly claims to be the Antichrist, okay, and wants to do away, in the name of selfishness, she wants you to have no responsibility for unborn fetuses. Do you think you would hear about that philosopher? And yet you have never heard about her in the economic realm, because, as Gertrude Himmelfarb, the great philosopher, has said, in today's culture, virtue is understood purely in its sexual connotations. We do not think of it in the economic realm about what is virtuous. Worth magazine once did a full cover story called Playing God at the Fed. It was about Alan Greenspan. You may remember years ago when Merrill Lynch got, and should have gotten some trouble, about sucking $100 million in commissions from Orange County by churning and so on and so on. I don't know if you remember that. They had hearings on it. Greenspan went, and get this, in my world, ever since I was on Wall Street, the guiding principle is called know your customer. I have to sell you investments that are suitable for you. So if you come in and you're a widow, okay, I do not speculate in commodities for you, and so on. So know your customer, give them suitable investments. Greenspan testified, these are the words, unburdened by any perceived need to take into consideration the interest of their counterparties. It sounds dull enough until you realize what he's driving at. Greenspan expressed that same radical belief more clearly during the 60s in a book of essays assembled by his mentor, the novelist and free market zealot, Ayn Rand. Milton Friedman took Ayn Rand's philosophies, great economist, and he was a great economist, but he had one very, very bad idea in my worldview. He said, famously said, the only social responsibility of a business is to make money. Does that explain Wall Street and insurance companies lately? The only social responsibility of a business is to make money. After the crash, Daniel McFadden, who's another Nobel laureate in economics, told the Wall Street Journal in late 2008, get this, what's been lost is the idea that a banker has some responsibility to protect the client's interest. So you sell them subprime loans, it's buyer beware, right? Okay. It hasn't been lost though, guys. It's been moralized away by competing religion.